The widow stood at the edge of Silver City's dusty Main Street, her black mourning dress collecting the New Mexico dust like a magnet, and watched as another potential customer crossed to the other side rather than walk past her general store. Lydia Reeves had been watching this same scene play out for 3 months now, ever since they buried Thomas in the rocky ground outside town, and the whispers had started almost before the last shovelful of dirt hit his pine coffin. A rattlesnake bite should have been simple bad luck, the kind of thing that happened to anyone foolish enough to reach into a woodpile without looking first. But the townsfolk of Silver City had long memories and even longer superstitions. They remembered that her father had died in a mine collapse 2 weeks before her wedding, that her mother had followed him 6 months later from grief, and now Thomas lay cold in the ground after barely 18 months of marriage. 3 deaths in 3 years made for a pattern, and patterns made people nervous. She pushed open the door to her store, the bell jingling overhead with false cheerfulness, and began the morning ritual of sweeping floors that hardly needed sweeping and dusting shelves that barely anyone would browse. The store had been Thomas's dream, a way to build something lasting in this rough territory that was still finding its footing after the war. He had poured their savings into the inventory, rows of canned goods and fabric bolts, tools and medicines, and everything a growing town might need. Now it sat like a mausoleum, beautiful and empty and slowly dying. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air, and Lydia felt the familiar weight of loneliness settle over her shoulders like a shawl. The bell rang, surprising her badly enough that she nearly dropped her broom. A man stood in the doorway, tall and lean with the kind of sun-weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He wore dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that he removed as he stepped inside, revealing dark hair that needed a trim and eyes the color of summer sky. He nodded to her politely, nothing in his expression suggesting he planned to flee back into the street. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as someone from further south, maybe Texas. "Heard you might have some coffee beans and supplies. Been on the trail for near about 2 weeks and I am down to my last everything." Lydia found her voice, rusty from disuse. "Yes, I have coffee. Brazilian came in last month before." She trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. "It is good quality. How much do you need?" £5 if you have it," he said, moving further into the store with an easy confidence. "Some sugar, flour, dried beef, beans. Bacon if it is fresh. I am setting up at the old Henderson place east of town, planning to run some cattle on that land. Heard it was available for a fair price." "The Henderson place," Lydia repeated, moving behind the counter where she felt more secure. "That has been empty for near 2 years now. The well is good, though, and the barn just needs some repair." "That is what the land office told me," he agreed, watching as she began measuring out coffee beans from the large burlap sack. "Name is Brennan Keller. Just came up from El Paso way, decided it was time to put down roots somewhere that was not quite so hot you could fry an egg on your saddle." Despite herself, Lydia felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Silver City gets plenty hot in summer, but I suppose not quite El Paso hot. I am Lydia Reeves. This is my store." The words felt strange, claiming ownership of something that had been Thomas's vision. Brennan nodded, his eyes taking in the well-stocked shelves with approval. "Good selection you have got here. Town is lucky to have a place like this." He paused, then added carefully, "I noticed the street was pretty empty on my way in. Everyone sleeping late." The kindness in his deflection made something in Lydia's chest tighten. "You will hear soon enough if you have not already. Everyone says I am cursed because my husband died." The words came out flat, matter of fact, worn smooth by repetition. My parents, too, within the last 3 years. Folks around here think death follows me like a shadow, and they would rather take their business to the trading post 2 streets over than risk whatever misfortune I might bring. She expected him to make his excuses, to suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere, to gather his supplies and promise to pay later before fleeing into the bright morning. Instead, Brennan Keller leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful rather than fearful. "Then I will take my chances with you," he said simply. "Lost my own parents to cholera when I was 15, lost my brother in the war, lost more friends than I care to count to everything from bullets to bad water. Way I figure it, death comes for everyone eventually, and it does not need help from a pretty widow running a general store." The word pretty hung in the air between them, unexpected and somehow more intimate than the rest of his speech. Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself with measuring flour into a cloth sack. "That is kind of you to say, Mr. Keller, but you have not seen how this town operates. They will treat you different once they know you have done business with me." "Good thing I have never been much concerned with what people think," Brennan replied. "I do what seems right to me, and right now that means buying supplies from a woman who clearly knows how to run a proper store and getting on with the business of building a ranch. Speaking of which, you would not happen to know anyone looking for work, would you? I am going to need help getting that place into shape, and another pair of hands would speed things along considerably." Lydia tied off the flour sack and moved on to the dried beef, slicing thick strips from the hanging piece in the back room. Her mind was working through possibilities, testing and discarding ideas. "There is a boy, Miguel Santos, about 17. Good worker, strong, but his father broke his leg in a riding accident last month and they need the money. Most of the ranchers will not hire him because he is Mexican, even though his family has been in this territory longer than most of the white settlers. Can he ride, handle cattle, follow instructions without needing everything explained twice? Yes to all three. He worked for the Circle T Ranch before the foreman decided they did not need Mexican hands anymore." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She had thought she was beyond caring about the injustices that played out daily in Silver City, too wrapped up in her own isolation to spare energy for anyone else's struggles. "Then tell him to come out to the Henderson place tomorrow morning if he is interested," Brennan said. "Fair wages, paid weekly, and I do not give a damn what language his parents spoke. I just need someone reliable." Lydia finished assembling his supplies, tallying the cost in her head. It came to more than she had taken in during the previous 2 weeks combined. Brennan counted out the money without complaint, adding an extra $1 that she tried to refuse. "For the delivery," he said with a slight grin. "Assuming you do deliveries." "I can bring Miguel with the supplies tomorrow," Lydia heard herself say. "He has a wagon, and it would give you a chance to talk with him about the work." "Sounds perfect." Brennan settled his hat back on his head, gathering the smaller items while leaving the heavier sacks for tomorrow's delivery. "I appreciate the help, Mrs. Reeves. Something tells me you and I are going to get along just fine." After he left, the store seemed even emptier than before, but somehow less oppressive. Lydia found herself humming as she updated her ledger, marking the sale with a satisfaction that went beyond simple commerce. Someone had looked at her without fear, had spoken to her like she was a normal woman running a normal business, had even called her pretty with such casual certainty that it had not felt like flattery but simple observation. The afternoon passed slowly, with only 2 other customers, both of whom hurried through their purchases with averted eyes. But Lydia's mood remained lighter than it had been in months. buoyed by the memory of blue eyes and a Texas drawl, and the simple statement that had sounded almost like a promise. That evening, she walked to the Santos house on the Mexican side of town, where the houses were smaller and closer together, but the yards were neat, and the smell of cooking filled the air with warmth. Maria Santos answered the door, her face brightening when she saw Lydia despite the general wariness most people showed her. "Lydia, come in, come in. You are just in time for dinner, and I will not hear any arguments." Maria had been one of the few people in Silver City who had not abandoned her after Thomas died, though even she had been careful not to be seen with Lydia too publicly. Inside, the house was small but immaculate, filled with the warmth of family. Miguel sat at the table helping his younger sisters with their schoolwork, while his father, Roberto, sat with his splinted leg propped on a chair. They made room for Lydia, and Maria loaded a plate with enchiladas that made her realize how little she had been eating lately, how many meals she had skipped in favor of simply closing the store and climbing the stairs to her empty apartment above. Between bites, Lydia explained about Brennan Keller and the job offer. Miguel's eyes lit up with an eagerness that made him look even younger than 17, though his shoulders were already broad from hard work and his hands were calloused from years of ranch labor. A real job, with honest pay. Miguel asked, glancing at his father for permission. "When does he want me to start?" "Tomorrow morning. I am bringing supplies out to the Henderson place, and he wants to meet you then." He seemed like a good man, Miguel, fair. He did not flinch when I mentioned your name or your family. Roberto Santos studied her with the kind of perception that came from years of reading people, of learning to spot danger before it arrived. "This man, he knows about your situation. The talk in town." "I told him myself," Lydia said quietly. "He said he would take his chances with me." Something passed between Roberto and Maria, a wordless communication built on years of marriage. Maria smiled, a knowing look in her eyes that made Lydia suddenly self-conscious. A man who sees past fear and superstition to what is real, that is a rare thing, especially in this town. "You should be careful, Lydia. A man like that might be dangerous in entirely different ways." "It is just business," Lydia protested, but she felt her cheeks warming again. "He needs supplies and I need customers. Miguel needs work and he needs help. Nothing more complicated than that." "Of course," Maria agreed, but her smile suggested she thought otherwise. Nothing complicated at all. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of New Mexico day where the sky stretched blue and endless and the air shimmered with heat by mid-morning. Lydia dressed carefully, telling herself it was simply about looking professional, that the fact she chose her blue calico dress instead of her mourning black had nothing to do with Brennan Keller. 3 months was not quite the proper mourning period, but Thomas had not been a man who believed in excessive formality, and she could almost hear him telling her to stop wearing black like a crow and put on something with color. Miguel arrived with his wagon just after dawn, eager and nervous in equal measure. They loaded the supplies together, Lydia directing the placement to ensure nothing would shift during the ride. The Henderson place was only about 5 miles east of town, an easy journey on a good morning, and Lydia found herself looking forward to it with an anticipation that felt rusty and new at the same time. The land opened up as they left Silver City behind, rolling hills covered in sparse grass and scattered juniper trees, mountains rising in the distance like purple promises. The Henderson place sat in a small valley where a creek ran year-round, the land good for cattle if someone was willing to put in the work. The house was adobe, sturdy but in need of repair, and the barn listed slightly to one side like a drunk trying to decide whether to fall down or stay upright. Brennan emerged from the house as they pulled up, wiping his hands on his pants. He had clearly been working already, his shirt damp with sweat and his face smudged with dirt. He waved them over with a grin that transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. "Perfect timing," he called. "I was just thinking I was going to have to make another trip to town for supplies, and here you are saving me the trouble." He helped Miguel unhitch the wagon with practiced ease, asking questions about his experience with cattle and horses, nodding approvingly at the answers. Within minutes, he and Miguel were discussing fence lines and water sources, their conversation flowing with the easy rhythm of two people who spoke the same language of ranch work. Lydia began unloading the supplies, carrying them into the house where she found herself automatically organizing them in the small kitchen. The house needed a woman's touch, she thought, then immediately felt guilty for thinking it. She had no business imagining what this house could look like with curtains on the windows and a garden out front, no business at all. "Thank you for bringing everything out," Brennan said from the doorway, making her jump. "And for telling me about Miguel. He's going to work out just fine, I can tell already. I have him starting on the barn today, shoring up that east wall before the whole thing decides to become firewood." "He is a good worker," Lydia said, setting the last of the coffee on the shelf. "His family has had a hard time lately. This job will mean a lot to them. It means a lot to me too. Cannot run a ranch alone, though I am stubborn enough I would probably try." Brennan moved further into the kitchen, his presence seeming to fill the small space. "Can I offer you some coffee before you head back? I know it is not much, but the pot is hot, and I make it strong enough to float a horseshoe." Lydia knew she should decline, should get back to the store even though no customers would be waiting. But the morning was beautiful, and the ride back would be hot, and something about the way Brennan looked at her made her want to stay a little longer in this space where she was not the cursed widow, but simply a woman having coffee with a man who seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. "That sounds nice," she said. They sat on the porch, watching Miguel work while they drank coffee that was indeed strong enough to make her eyes water slightly. Brennan talked about his plans for the ranch, the dreams he had of building something lasting in this territory that was still wild enough to feel like freedom. Lydia found herself talking too, telling him about how she and Thomas had met, how they had planned to build a life together before a snake and bad timing had stolen those plans away. "It is strange," she said, surprised at her own honesty. "I miss him, but sometimes I think I miss the future we were supposed to have more than I miss him specifically. Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you honest," Brennan replied. "I think a lot of people confuse missing someone with missing the life they thought they were going to have. Both are real, both hurt, but they are not quite the same thing." The sun climbed higher, and Lydia knew she should go. But when she stood, Brennan stood too, his hand brushing hers as he took her empty cup, and the contact sent a jolt through her that was entirely inappropriate for a widow of 3 months. "Will you come back?" he asked, his voice casual but his eyes intent. "To check on your delivery, make sure everything arrived in good condition." "That is not usually how it works," Lydia said, but she was smiling. "But I suppose I could make an exception, for a new customer. Glad to hear it, and Mrs. Reeves, thank you for taking a chance on someone new in town, for helping Miguel for the company. It means more than you might think." The ride back to Silver City felt shorter than the ride out, and Lydia caught herself humming again, a habit she had lost after Thomas died. The store was indeed empty when she returned, but she threw herself into work with renewed energy, taking inventory and making lists of what she needed to order. Her mind kept drifting to the Henderson place, to blue eyes and honest conversations, and the feeling of possibility that had been absent from her life for so long. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Brennan needed supplies regularly as he worked to get the ranch operational, and he always came to Lydia's store, even when the trading post would have been closer. Sometimes Miguel accompanied him, sometimes he came alone, but he always stayed to talk, leaning against the counter and sharing stories of his progress, or asking her advice about what supplies he would need next. The townsfolk noticed, of course, and the whispers intensified. Clara Morrison, who ran the boarding house, made pointed comments about impropriety and proper mourning periods. Reverend Thompson suggested from the pulpit that some people did not show proper respect for the dead, his eyes finding Lydia in her usual pew. But Brennan had been right about not caring what people thought. When he came to town, he walked with Lydia openly, carrying her packages or escorting her to the post office to mail her supply orders. He took his meals at the boarding house and ignored Clara Morrison's pointed silences, tipped his hat to the reverend with perfect politeness while making it clear he would not be attending services. And slowly, inevitably, his presence began to shift the social dynamics of Silver City. Miguel worked for him and thrived, and the Santos family spoke highly of his fairness and generosity. Other Mexican families began to view him as someone who judged by character rather than heritage. The few ranchers who were not caught up in town superstitions respected his knowledge and work ethic. 2 months after Brennan arrived in Silver City, he invited Lydia to dinner at the ranch. She accepted with a flutter in her stomach that felt like anticipation mixed with guilt. Thomas had been dead for 5 months now, barely past the minimum mourning period, and here she was having dinner with another man. But Thomas was gone, and she was still alive, and Brennan made her feel alive in ways she had almost forgotten. She borrowed Maria's wagon and drove out in the late afternoon, bringing a pie she had baked that morning, apple with cinnamon the way her mother had taught her. The ranch looked different than it had 2 months ago. The barn stood straight now, its fresh lumber bright against the weathered boards. The house had new shutters, and someone had cleared the weeds from around the foundation. Flowers grew in a bed near the porch, wildflowers transplanted from the hills, and she wondered if Brennan had put them there, or if Miguel had suggested it. Brennan met her at the door, cleaned up and wearing a shirt she suspected was new, his hair damp from washing. "You found the place all right," he said, his smile welcoming. "Come in, dinner is almost ready. I should warn you, I am not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent steak and potatoes without burning down the kitchen." The interior of the house had been transformed too. The furniture was still sparse, but everything was clean and organized, and curtains hung at the windows filtering the late afternoon sun into golden streams. The table was set with care, mismatched plates that had probably come from her store, and wildflowers in a jar as a centerpiece. Dinner was indeed simple but good, and the conversation flowed easily as it always did between them. They talked about everything and nothing, books they had read, places they had been, dreams they held for the future. Brennan told her about growing up in East Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the war years he did not like to discuss, but that had shaped him nonetheless. Lydia talked about her childhood in Santa Fe, about moving to Silver City with her parents when her father got work in the mines, about meeting Thomas at a church social and thinking he was the most boring man she had ever met until he started talking about books and revealed a mind as sharp as any scholar. "Do you think he would mind?" Brennan asked suddenly, his eyes serious. "You being here, I mean, having dinner with me." Lydia considered the question honestly, turning it over in her mind. "No," she said finally. "Thomas was practical about death." He always said that if something happened to him, I should not waste my life mourning what was gone. He would want me to be happy, to keep living, though I think he imagined I would wait longer than 5 months before having dinner with a handsome cowboy. Handsome, am I? Brennan's eyes crinkled with amusement. I will have to tell my mirror, since it keeps showing me a sun-worn man who is pushing 35 and starting to feel it. 35 is not old, Lydia protested. I am 23 myself, and I feel ancient most days. 23, Brennan repeated softly. Thomas must have been young too then. 26 when he died. We thought we had all the time in the world. The familiar ache rose in her chest, but it was softer now, grief giving way to acceptance. I suppose that is the curse of being young. You think death is something that happens to other people, older people. You do not expect it to reach out and take someone in their prime. They moved to the porch after dinner, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and purple. The air cooled rapidly as it always did in the desert, the temperature dropping from sweltering to pleasant in a matter of hours. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered, their voices lonely and wild. I should tell you something, Brennan said, his voice careful. People have been talking to me, warning me about you, about the curse, about how I should stay away before something terrible happens to me too. Lydia felt her stomach drop. The pleasant evening suddenly soured. What did you say? I told them I appreciate their concern, but I make my own decisions about who I spend time with. I told them that life is risky and death comes for everyone, curse or no curse. And I told them that you are the most interesting woman I have met in Silver City, and I would be a fool to avoid you because of superstitious nonsense. He turned to look at her, his expression earnest. I meant what I said that first day, Lydia. I will take my chances with you. Whatever those chances might be. The emotion that swept through Lydia was almost overwhelming, a mixture of relief and gratitude and something warmer, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of love. You should not dismiss it so easily, she whispered. 3 people I loved have died. What if there is something to it? What if caring about me is dangerous? What if it is not? Brennan countered. What if it is just coincidence and bad luck, and we are letting fear steal something that could be good, something that could be great? He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the porch railing. I am not saying we rush into anything. I know you are still grieving, still figuring out who you are without Thomas, but I am saying I would like to see where this goes, if you would like that too. Lydia looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb traced gentle circles on her skin, and made a decision. Life was uncertain. Death came for everyone eventually, and she could either hide from connection out of fear, or she could reach for happiness while it was offered. I would like that, she said. Very much. The weeks that followed were the happiest Lydia had known since before her father died. Brennan courted her properly, or as properly as a widow could be courted, with Sunday rides out to the ranch and quiet dinners in her apartment above the store. He respected her need to take things slowly, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, content to build a foundation of friendship and trust beneath the growing attraction between them. The town continued to gossip, but increasingly they did so with uncertainty rather than conviction. Brennan remained stubbornly alive and healthy. The ranch thrived under his management, and even Clara Morrison had to admit that he seemed to be managing just fine, despite his association with the cursed widow. In September, 4 months after Brennan first walked into her store, he asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the creek on his property, having ridden out after church to escape the heat and the stares. The proposal was simple and perfect. No elaborate speeches or grand gestures, just Brennan taking her hand and saying he wanted to wake up next to her every morning for the rest of his life, however long or short that might be. Lydia said yes without hesitation, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with only Miguel's family and a few of Brennan's neighbors in attendance. The reverend refused to perform the service, citing the impropriety of such a hasty remarriage. So they found a justice of the peace in a neighboring town who was happy to take their money and ask no questions. The wedding was simple but joyful. Maria Santos cooking a feast that fed everyone twice over, Miguel playing guitar while his sisters danced, and Brennan looking at Lydia like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever spoken. When they finally said their vows, Lydia felt the weight of the past year lift from her shoulders, felt the curse that had haunted her reveal itself as nothing more than coincidence and fear. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, Brennan patient with her nervousness, showing her that intimacy could be more than duty or obligation. He made her laugh and gasp and forget everything except the feel of his hands on her skin and the way he said her name like it was sacred. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed he had built himself, and Lydia felt truly happy for the first time since her father died. Life as a rancher's wife was different than life as a shopkeeper's wife, but Lydia adapted quickly. She kept the store open 3 days a week, hiring Maria Santos to help mind it, and spent the rest of her time at the ranch. She learned to ride better, to help with the cattle when needed, to manage the household accounts and plan for growth. Brennan proved to be everything she had hoped for in a partner: hardworking, honest, affectionate, and utterly unwilling to let fear or superstition dictate their lives. The first winter was hard, New Mexico cold biting through layers of clothing and making every task twice as difficult. They lost some cattle to the weather and some more to wolves, but they made it through together, huddled by the fire on the worst nights and planning for spring when the world would warm again. Miguel continued to work for them, becoming more like family than employee, and his father recovered enough to help with lighter tasks around the ranch. In February, nearly a year after Brennan first walked into her store, Lydia realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. 3 people she loved had died, and now she was bringing new life into the world, a child that would be vulnerable in ways that made her heart clench with protective fear. When she told Brennan, he swept her into his arms and spun her around despite her laughing protests, his joy uncomplicated by the superstitions that still haunted her. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "You and me, Lydia, we are going to be parents." "Are you not afraid?" she asked him later when they were lying in bed with his hand splayed across her still flat stomach. "Everyone says I am cursed. What if something happens to the baby? What if the curse is real? Then we will deal with it together," Brennan said firmly. "But I do not believe in curses, Lydia. I believe in bad luck and worse timing, and I believe that we have had enough of both to last a lifetime. This baby is going to be fine. You are going to be fine. And we are going to raise a whole house full of children on this ranch and grow old together watching them have children of their own." His certainty was infectious, and Lydia let herself believe, let herself hope that maybe the curse had been broken by love and stubbornness, and a cowboy who refused to be afraid. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Lydia fought waves of nausea that lasted well into her 4th month. Maria became her constant companion, sharing wisdom from her own pregnancies and making sure Lydia ate properly and rested when she needed to. Brennan hovered like a worried hawk, trying not to be obvious about it and failing completely, until Lydia finally had to tell him she was not made of glass and would not break from normal activity. "I know that," he protested. "I just want to make sure you are taken care of. Is that so wrong?" "It is sweet," Lydia assured him, kissing his worried face. "But I can still help with the chickens and cook dinner without endangering our child. You need to let me live normally, Brennan. I cannot spend the next 6 months sitting in a chair like an invalid." He tried, but his protective nature kept showing through in small ways, checking on her more frequently, insisting she take breaks, bringing her water or snacks throughout the day. Lydia found it endearing rather than annoying, this evidence that he cared so deeply about her well-being. In June, with the summer heat building and the baby due in early October, they received unexpected news. Clara Morrison stopped by the store, her manner stiff but her message surprising. "The town council has been discussing things," she said without preamble. "Your husband has made quite an impression, Mrs. Keller. His ranch is doing well, he treats his workers fairly, and he has helped several families with loans and advice. And you have not lost anyone else to this supposed curse of yours. People are starting to think maybe they were hasty in their judgment." Lydia waited, knowing there was more coming. "The Ladies' Aid Society would like to host a baby shower for you," Clara continued, the words clearly costing her some pride. "If you would be amenable to that. It would be a way of welcoming you back into the community proper, showing that we do not hold your past against you." It was not quite an apology, but it was close enough. Lydia accepted graciously, and 2 weeks later found herself sitting in the church hall surrounded by women who had avoided her for over a year, accepting gifts for the baby and eating cake while Maria beamed proudly beside her. Brennan waited outside with the men, but she could see him through the window, laughing at something one of the ranchers said, fully integrated into the community that had tried to warn him away from her. The baby shower marked a turning point. People began greeting Lydia on the street again, shopping at her store more regularly, treating her like a normal member of the community rather than a dangerous pariah. She realized that Brennan had been right all along. The curse had never been real, just fear and coincidence wrapped in superstition. By refusing to believe in it, by living their lives openly and happily, they had broken its hold over her. October arrived with cooler temperatures and golden light, and their son was born on a bright afternoon, with Maria acting as midwife and Brennan pacing holes in the porch outside. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Lydia finally held her baby boy, she felt a completeness she had not known was possible. He was perfect, with Brennan's eyes and her dark hair, strong lungs that he demonstrated immediately, and tiny fingers that gripped hers with surprising strength. Brennan came in after Maria cleaned up, his face pale with worry that transformed to wonder when he saw his son. "He is beautiful," he whispered, touching the baby's cheek with one tentative finger. "You are beautiful. I cannot believe this is real." "Believe it," Lydia said, exhausted but happy. "We made a person, Brennan. An actual person." They named him Benjamin Thomas Keller, honoring both Brennan's father and Lydia's first husband, a gesture that felt right rather than strange. Brennan had never been jealous of Thomas's memory, understanding that Lydia's past was part of what made her who she was, and Lydia loved him all the more for that generosity of spirit. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful, filled with sleepless nights and moments of pure joy. Benjamin proved to be a healthy baby with powerful lungs and strong opinions about when he wanted to eat, which seemed to be constantly. Brennan took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with a crying baby at 2 in the morning, singing off key lullabies that somehow worked despite their lack of melody. Winter came again, their second together, and Lydia marveled at how different her life was from 2 years ago. Then she had been alone and grieving, labeled as cursed, watching her business fail and her future narrow to a single dark point. Now she was a wife and mother, living on a thriving ranch with a husband she loved deeply, and a community that had slowly accepted her back into its fold. The curse that had once defined her had faded into nothing more than a bad memory, proof that fear could be overcome, and that love was stronger than superstition. In the spring, when Benjamin was 6 months old and starting to show signs of his father's stubbornness, Brennan surprised her with a gift. He had been working on something in the barn for weeks, disappearing after dinner and refusing to tell her what he was building. When he finally revealed it, Lydia found herself staring at a beautiful cradle made from polished wood, carved with intricate designs of horses and cattle, and the mountains that surrounded their ranch. "For the next one," Brennan said with a grin. "And the one after that, and however many more we are blessed with. I figure we will need it since I plan on filling this house with children." "Do you now?" Lydia asked, laughing. "And do I get a say in this plan?" "Of course you do, but I am hoping you will agree with me." He pulled her close, careful not to crush Benjamin, who was sleeping in her arms. "I want a big family, Lydia. I want noise and chaos and children running everywhere. I want to build something that lasts, something that proves death does not always win." "Death never wins," Lydia said softly. "It just pauses things for a while. But life goes on, and love goes on, and we go on. And yes, I want more children too. I want to fill this house with love and laughter and prove that curses are only as powerful as we let them be." They had 3 more children over the next 6 years. A daughter named Lucy Rose, who had Lydia's green eyes and her father's determination. Twin boys named Daniel and David, who kept everyone on their toes with their mischievous energy. And finally, another daughter, Emma Grace, who arrived unexpectedly when Lydia thought she was done having babies. The ranch grew along with their family, expanding to include more cattle and better facilities, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Miguel married a girl from town, Elena Martinez, and Brennan helped them buy a small piece of land adjoining the ranch where they built their own house and started their own family. The Santos family prospered, Roberto's leg healing well enough that he could work again, and Maria opened a restaurant in town that quickly became the most popular eating establishment in Silver City. The community that had once shunned both the Mexican families and the cursed widow slowly transformed into something more inclusive, more accepting, though progress was slow and uneven. Through it all, Lydia and Brennan remained deeply in love, their connection deepening with each passing year. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the way couples do when they are truly partners rather than just spouses sharing a house. They fought occasionally, usually about Brennan taking too many risks or Lydia being too cautious, but they always made up before the sun set, neither willing to let anger poison what they had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Brennan took Lydia back to the creek where he had proposed, leaving the children with Maria for the evening. They sat on the bank watching the water flow past, the same water that had been flowing when they first met, when they first fell in love, when they first decided to take chances on each other despite what everyone said. "You ever regret it?" Lydia asked, the question she had never quite had the courage to voice before. "Taking your chances with me, tying yourself to someone everyone thought was cursed." Brennan pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his heart beating steady and strong. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lydia Keller. You and our children and this life we have built together. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, curse or no curse. There never was a curse, Lydia said, the words coming easier now than they once had. Just bad luck and fear and people looking for patterns where none existed. But I am grateful for it in a strange way, because it brought you to me. You saw past everyone's warnings and gave me a chance when no one else would. You gave yourself a chance, Brennan corrected. You could have closed yourself off, could have accepted what everyone said about you, could have spent your life alone because you were afraid of bringing death to anyone else. But you did not. You stayed open to possibility, and that took more courage than anything I ever did. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and purple, the desert cooling around them. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and an owl called, the sounds of their ranch, their home, their life together. Lydia thought about the girl she had been 11 years ago, standing at the edge of Silver City's Main Street watching customers avoid her store, believing herself cursed and alone. That girl could never have imagined this future, this happiness, this love that had proved stronger than fear and deeper than death. Benjamin would turn 10 soon, already showing signs of the man he would become, tall and strong with his father's sense of justice and his mother's compassion. Lucy was 8 and absolutely fearless, climbing trees and riding horses, and declaring she was going to be a rancher like her father when she grew up. The twins were 6 and identical in appearance, but completely different in personality. Daniel quiet and thoughtful, while David never met a situation he could not turn into a game. And Emma was 4, the baby of the family who had everyone wrapped around her tiny finger, especially her father who could deny her nothing. We made a good life, Lydia said, summing up a decade of joy and struggle and growth in 5 simple words. We made the best life, Brennan agreed. And we are not done yet. We have got decades ahead of us still, God willing. Grandchildren to meet, new adventures to have, more memories to make. No more children, though, Lydia said firmly. 5 is plenty, more than plenty. 5 is perfect, Brennan agreed with a laugh. Though I would not have minded 6. We can adopt, Lydia suggested. There are always children who need homes, especially Mexican or Indian children that most people will not take in. We could give them the kind of chance that someone gave us. Brennan kissed the top of her head, his voice warm with love and pride. That is exactly the kind of thing that makes me love you more every day. You always think about how to make things better, not just for us but for everyone. They did adopt, twice actually. A Mexican boy named Carlos whose parents died in a fire, and later a Mescalero Apache girl named Nina, whose mother had died in childbirth and whose father could not care for her alone. Both children thrived in the Keller household, accepted as full siblings by the biological children, and loved fiercely by Brennan and Lydia. The ranch became known as a place where anyone could find acceptance regardless of their heritage, where hard work was valued more than skin color or ancestry, where love mattered more than blood. As the years passed and New Mexico moved closer to statehood, Silver City grew and changed. The wild frontier town of Lydia's youth transformed into something more settled, more civilized, though it never lost its essential character. The general store became one of the most successful businesses in town, eventually expanding to a second location. The ranch grew to cover several thousand acres, providing employment for dozens of families and becoming a model for ethical treatment of workers. But through all the changes and growth, the heart of the Keller family remained the same. Brennan and Lydia, the cowboy who took his chances and the widow who dared to love again, stayed devoted to each other through prosperity and hardship, through the raising of 7 children and eventually the welcoming of grandchildren. They proved that curses could be broken, that fear could be overcome, that love was always worth the risk. On their 25th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, with Benjamin married and starting his own ranch, Lucy working as a teacher in town, the twins helping run the family operation, Emma studying to be a doctor against all social convention, and Carlos and Nina thriving as beloved members of the family, Lydia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I used to think death followed me," she told the gathered family, her voice strong despite her 50 years. "I thought I was cursed, that anyone who loved me was in danger, but your father taught me different. He taught me that life is always a risk, but it is a risk worth taking. He taught me that love is stronger than fear, and that family is not just about blood, but about who you choose to stand beside through whatever comes." Brennan stood and pulled her to her feet, leading her in a dance while their children and grandchildren clapped and cheered. They moved together with the ease of long practice, two people who had learned each other so thoroughly that they could anticipate each other's movements without thinking. "I love you," Brennan whispered in her ear as they swayed together. "From that first day until forever. You are the best chance I ever took." "I love you too," Lydia replied, her heart full to bursting with joy and gratitude and the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Thank you for taking your chances with me." They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by the family they had built together, living proof that curses were nothing but shadows and that love, real love, could light up even the darkest places. The widow who was cursed and the cowboy who did not care had found their happy ending, not in some distant future but right here, right now, in every moment they chose to spend together, in every child they raised, in every challenge they faced side by side, in every sunrise they watched break over the New Mexico desert that had become their home. And when they were very old, long after their children were grown and their grandchildren were having children of their own, Brennan and Lydia would sit on that same porch where he had first told her he would take his chances, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they had built their life upon. They would remember that day in the general store when a dusty cowboy walked through the door and changed everything, when fear gave way to possibility, when curse became blessing, when two lonely people found each other and decided that love was always worth the risk. Their love story became legend in Silver City, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from fiction. But the heart of it remained true. A widow branded as cursed, a cowboy willing to take chances, and the life they built together that proved love could conquer anything. They lived into their 80s, both of them, healthy and happy until the very end, passing within months of each other as if neither could bear to be without the other for long. They were buried side by side on the ranch, beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek where Brennan had proposed all those years ago. Their headstones simple, but their legacy profound. The ranch continued through their children and grandchildren. The store remained a cornerstone of Silver City, and the family they had created continued to grow and thrive. But more than any material success, their greatest legacy was the lesson they taught everyone who knew them: that curses are only as powerful as belief makes them, that fear is meant to be challenged, and that real love, the kind that stands firm against doubt and death, and every dark thing the world can throw at it, is the most powerful force in the universe. Brennan Keller took his chances with Lydia Reeves, and in doing so, they both won everything that mattered.